Sunday Talks with the Marshmallow Man.
Hey, I'm Ozzy from Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedal boards. DC, AC, got all kinds of colors. Got a sale going on. Check us out at threemonkeyssolderless.com. You won't be disappointed. Road tested, been on the road with many bands for years. No problems. All right, so welcome back to Sunday with the Marshmallow Man. And I think this week we got some beginnings of some participation from some of the channel guys, some of the channel members, some of my buddies. And I think we're going to start off right away with that. So a contributor to the channel, it was posted in the comments section, wanted to get a marshmallow made. So I made him a marshmallow and shipped it off to him. And he sent me back some clips that he recorded with the marshmallow. So we're going to go just take a quick listen to it because I'm blown away. And then we're going to go into the comments, and then we're going to check out some more ideas about what was going on from that Zlaz pick with the white knob, right? So we're going to continue all this good stuff. But first, let's listen to this clip, all right? So I got this. This clip I got yesterday, right? And it's Feel Your Love Tonight. And we've got Eddie on one side. He's on the right side. And we've got our channel guy on the left side. So I'm just going to pan. I've got it loaded into GarageBand. So I'm just going to pan it back and forth between the two so you can hear this. All right. It kind of, tell me what you think here. All right. So let's just hit it. We're going to start off listening to the Ed side, and then I'm going to pan across to the contributor side. So here we go. All right, user side, Eddie side, user side, Eddie side, user side. And here it is in both. So I was pretty impressed with that. I thought this individual has got some really good ears too for just dialing that in and his playing style. He sent me, it was done with the marshmallow, line out into the aux box, using, the greenback setting. The guitar was an Explorer, right? But with a Halen custom wound pickup that he had built for him from Halen Pickups. So I'm going to be hitting up Halen for one of these pickups. You can count on it, right? Got a couple more pickups to kind of put into the mix, right? So I did get the Duncan Custom, but I didn't want to step on it for this clip, for this issue, for this episode. I thought that this particular clip it really put a smile on my face to see guys that can really kind of put it down, and I much appreciate it for letting me use it for this. Yeah, so wow, that was really close. So kudos to you. Absolutely. I want to hear more too. All right, so let's get into some questions, or let's get into some things, right? So I'm going to go into the comment section here on the YouTube and go to the comments I haven't responded to and start responding to them. And they don't always have to be in the same place, right? They don't have to be in this thread below. Like if you wanted to ask something, comment below, and next week, we'll address it and we'll keep the whole thing going and see where it happens. So the first one is from Pedro Lorenco, who was commenting on the Variac myth busting 90 versus 120 you decide video I did a couple years ago. And it says 90 volt has that distinctive grain. Cool. I appreciate the comment. Yeah, as you start messing with the voltages on it, it does start to change things. But there's definitely more to it than just the variac. And as my theories have come to evolve, and obviously these are my theories, so take them with a grain of salt. If you agree with them, I'm happy. If you're not, maybe I'll learn something too, right? So it's my feeling that the variac was there as a preventative measure, in a sense, to keep his amp from exploding, and the sound was a byproduct of the way he was running it, which was causing it to explode. The variac was a corrective measure, right? And it does change the sound slightly, definitely, especially when you start lowering the heater voltages. So yeah, thanks for the comment. 90 volts has that distinctive grain. All right, and Pedro commented again, and this one's on slaving 3 amps with the load box. Let's see. After my comment on your last video, I watched this. So I guess this was right after he watched the variac video. Funny, I have a PAL Plexi preamp pedal, and in front of my amps it gives a very similar result. All right, so this is a slaving video where I was running, I was using 3 amps on that one, which was nuts. Right, so I think I was running 1 amp into another amp into another amp. Man, I'm crazy. But basically, it's using one head as a preamp and the next head as the power amp, right? Which is what this was sort of designed around, that concept. It has the load already in the line out. So this is the master head. Yeah, so the slaving thing. So let's go on with that. Have a pedal PAL Plexi, and in front of my amps, it gives a very similar result. Well, that's sort of, why I came along with making the little Moto Teddy Jose pedals and SM3 pedals, right? Small box pedals, which was to try to get the sound of a slaving unit without having to use a head. And yeah, that does a pretty good job. I definitely think it does. But there's definitely something about loading these power tubes in a very particular way that makes them distort, which is the key thing here. It's a distortion character to my ear, more so than gain, right? Because like if you took a diesel, right, which is like a Herbert or something like that, which is just, I've had those things in my shop when they first came out. I had one in and I was playing. I was like, man, if you are playing death metal, this is the shit. Now, maybe there's something else out there that's sort of like another diesel, like the Einstein or something that's blown that out of the water. But at the time, I was like, if you want like the heaviest distortion sound in history, it's this. But does it sound like Van Halen 1? No. It's not about gain. It's not about how many cascaded signals, cascaded tube stages you can have in your head to my ear to get that sound. It's about how the amplifier distorts, where it is on the curve, and the fingerprint of it, which I think has more to do with loading than anything else to create a clipping effect, where the tubes are in a conduction point where they're really not working the way they should. But yeah, it's a good idea that like the using the little pedal to slave another head. I think it sounds really good. All right, so I'm all about that. So Pedro, I'm with you on that. Which is something I can't achieve with boosts, overdrives, or distortion pedals, right? So that's the end of his comment here, talking about that his Plexi PAL, which I don't know what it is. I'm assuming it's a tube Plexi preamp, is different than, achieving with boosts, overdrives, and distortion pedals. Now, it depends, like when you get into really the physics of everything, right? It's impedance that rules the world. Right? And impedance at frequency, right? Which is capacitance, inductance, resistance. All of these things create impedance at frequencies, right? So that creates the fingerprint, the notches, the different things, right? That we sort of hear and then can attribute as a sound, like a human voice has a very particular sound to it. If I were to just turn down the treble on my voice, right? It still sounds like my voice. Right, because the difference or differentials between the different points and frequencies is what creates the character, not whether it's bass heavy or treble heavy. And to remove that requires some serious, computing power to change a person's voice. Right, it has to completely just redo that those relationships and create a new image entirely, right? And it never quite works out right. You can always tell the difference, right? So that's an interesting thing. So with the pedals, they have a different impedance, right? Tube gear with transformers made it up to another piece of gear that has a different impedance is going to create a different sonic signature, right? So if you're running high impedance into low impedance or low impedance into high impedance or matching the two impedances, these things will create differences in how the sound appears, right? The different sonic signatures. So yeah, definitely, solid state gear that's very low impedance versus maybe higher impedance stuff, it's going to sound different. So definitely, that's the case. All right, let's move on. We got David Rensa from the Van Halen 1 pickup comparison. That's where I did like a whole bunch of pickups, Mighty Mites and Duncans and Ibanez, pickups and on and on and on and on. Obviously, I don't have every pickup known to mankind, so I'm going to have to add to those, right? And maybe we'll do another comparison with the Marshmallow soon. But it says, you missed the pickup. I saw one of the photos on the original album. After hearing your comparison, pretty sure Van Halen 1 and 2 were recorded with a DiMarzio, but not the DP100. So I don't see anything beyond that. So if you're listening, David, I put down on the bottom which DiMarzio pickup you believe it was recorded with, if it wasn't the DP100. And on the original album, I mean, everybody could vary, right? So that would be the black and white Strat that he's holding up on Van Halen 1. I thought that was an 1800 Super Stud, Mighty Mite, in that picture. But until we get, I don't know who took those photos, whether it's Laz took those or someone else. But if anybody's got like a super high-res photo of that particular picture, I'd love to see it. I think it was the Mighty Mite 18 that is in that photo. That doesn't mean that what was in the guitar at the time of recording, right? Anything could have changed. All right, thanks for that comment, David, but enlighten me. James Rickman, another great vid, Oz, thank you. Us EVH gear freaks are loving this. Well, that's great. That brings a smile to my face too, because you wonder what the hell you're doing, and it's like a little community, right, of us ed freaks, and you never know, right, who's going on. And I talk on the phone all the time with guys that are, regular ed heads, and we check in with each other. It's like a support group. It's fucking crazy. So I had a conversation a couple of days ago with a longtime ed head, sort of like phone guy that we talk back and forth and bull crap about different stuff. And I was like, man, it's like, I've spent my whole life, since I was like 15 or 14, or 13 or I don't even know, sort of like chasing this sound and working it out. And it's sort of been like my Kennedy assassination thing. And I was like, when I die, it's like, am I going to get, the third degree about this, right? It'd be like, you get through the gates and there's, St. Peter, and St. Peter's like, so I see that you spent your whole life chasing the brown sound. And I'd be like, uh-huh. And he'd be like, so what was that knob, right? And St. Peter is even an ed head. Who the hell knows? All right, so yeah. You need to get together. This is going on with the comment from James Rickman. You need to get together with Dave Friedman, Pete Thorne, Jim Gostad, and Jason Tong to discuss this topic. That would be legendary. I do appreciate the comment. I kind of like going in my own direction. I've always felt like if I'm not self-directed, I lose myself. Right, so I feel like I don't like to expose myself to outside influences too much, because I think it colors my mind a little bit and leads me to, suppositions that I may not want to know, or I may not want to have influenced the direction I'm going in. So that may be crazy, it may not be, but I'm aware of these guys for sure. I know who Dave Friedman is from Friedman Amps. Pete Thorne, I know Pete Thorne, I've met him. Great guitar player for sure. Yeah, back in the early stages of Three Monkeys, we went out to a Chris Cornell show with Brad, and Pete was the guitar player, and we brought him an orangutan to put in the mix. And he had a really cool rig back then too. He had some like train wreck stuff, some what else did he have? I think he had maybe a two rock and maybe an EVH. It was a cool sound. So yeah, and Jim Gosted, I was keyed into one of his videos regarding the first album. I thought he did a great job there. Jason, I'm not familiar with, so Jason Tong. I'm gonna have to Google that then and see what's going on. But yeah, I appreciate the comment much. Thank you so much. We have another one from Pedro Lorenco. This one's a little bit longer. I was never a big EVH aficionado, but I'm a big tube amp collector and like to mod amps. Cool. So my last 2 cents. Last episode, you kind of dismissed the possibility of the knob being a master volume because it would implicate the use of longer wires. I've been analyzing some super lead gut photos, and I must say that while today I would use shorter wires for less noise, when I started, my first thought would be probably to drill a hole and put the knob where there's the most space available and away from heaters. I mean, I guess that's possible. Anybody can, change, differ about where they would put something, right? And I don't think I was dismissing it. I was just thinking about like, what would I do as a designer, as someone that's, been around the gear for a really long time? How would I do it? And I think if Jose was the one who put that in there, had been around gear for a very long time, right? He was the designer of the Super Beetle. He worked for big companies. He had probably 50, 60 years, who knows, under his belt. So he may have done that. I just never saw him do that in that place. I never saw one of his amps with a knob there. That's not to say it didn't happen. And, I respect your opinion, definitely, for that. So it's possible someone else modded the amplifier other than Jose and put it there because they were like, where can I stuff it? And they looked for an open space. So, okay, if that was the first thing that occurred to Pedro, then it would not be unique in that respect, right? I always work off the supposition that if I can think of it, another person can think of it. If I'm doing it, probably somebody else is doing it, right? So that's a legitimate thought process and lends credibility to what Pedro is saying. So, yes. Number 2 in the question. Read on a forum that this knob only shows on photos from the recording of Van Halen 2. Is there any reason to think it was used on the first record? All right, so I don't know of any photograph from one other than the one shot that we received not too long ago, looking through the control room glass at the back of Ed playing Explorer. And you can only see a speaker cabinet and part of it with a mic stand and a microphone pointing at the top of the slant cabinet. So, yeah, I mean, that picture was Van Halen too, right? No question about it. The Zla's photograph that we know of the amp on the floor is from 2, right? So there's no reason to believe it was on 1. We don't even know what it is, whether it was functional. So, yeah, we don't know. Going on with that part of the question, Pedro continues on. What EVH tone are we trying to achieve? Both similar texture, but I do prefer the first album. For this, it's always the first album, right? The second album, to me, sounds very different. It sounds closer to what I expect a normal Plexi Marshall to sound like, right? That's more along the lines of what a stock amp through a cabinet mic'd up in a room would sound like, right? The way it feeds back, the duration of feedback, the pick attack, the fact that it's not super splatty, the fact that it's not going into this crazy overload. It makes me think that the setup changed for the second album, right? Something changed, and it changed on every album. So yeah, for this, we're talking about 1. All right, the third part of Pedro's question. I spent a couple hours with my amps, attenuator, and boost to try to achieve a similar sound. I could get in the ballpark pretty easy, but I got surprising results using the post-phaser inverter master volume on my Orange. I think a lot of the distortion character comes from the phase inverter tube, which eliminates the chance of a master volume post-cathode follower pre or post-EQ. I wouldn't totally dismiss the possibility of a cross-line PPI-MV. they sound a bit harsh, but for a small amount of attenuation can work. Pedro, I think you're on to something interesting there. I won't go too deep into it, but the orange amplifier, if you're talking about like the Graphic 120, is a very interesting amplifier in terms of its power amp. All right, it uses a different kind of phase inverter than a Marshall does. And that particular phase inverter is prone to weird loading characteristics and can sound a little weird. Right? It doesn't, the oranges do not sound like Marshalls, and certain of them can sound very much like what you're talking about. So that was something I always thought about too. You know, was there a orange, right? And there's many ways to skin a cat. Once you sort of understand the basic principles of how this is starting to fall together in my mind, there's probably 2 or 3 ways to get to the same address. A Graphic 120 is possible, right? I think that there's some parts about the Graphic 120 that lead me away from it. But yes, the Graphic 120 has an element to it which is similar to what we hear from things like the Marshmallow or the first album, which is that tube that's gone into a state where it's clipping very hard. It's not really cascaded gain. All right. So that's interesting, right? Now I want to hear more details about your amp and setup. I think we've talked a little bit about the Marshmallow and how it's set up. I'm just basically running guitar into the amp and into aux boxes, into an aux box, and then directly into a Focusrite, interface. So that's about it, right? I have a line out on this thing. The transformers on the amplifier I designed for doing something very different, right, than a stock amplifier. The preamp section, all of the circuitry in there, if I were to open this amp and show it to you, you would look at it and say, I don't see anything different than a stock, 1968 to 1972-ish Marshall. Nothing like that. It's all in the transformers, all right? So that we've got. All right, so then we've got Che Guitarra. I remember Che. I still like that name, Che Guitarra. What's the schematic for the Moto Teddy? I'm not sure which Moto Teddy you're referring to, but I'm going to guess. It's not here anymore. Someone stole the Moto Teddy. I'm going to guess it was the FET preamp I was using in the last video to drive the front end of that. And that's just a Dumble FET circuit. And the schematic for it you could find online, I'm pretty sure by now. I don't have the exact place that you would be able to find it, but it would be contained in the overall schematic of like a Dumble overdrive special, right? And it would be the FET input, and it would be a little card that's mounted on the sidewall close to the input jacks. That's it. And I just decided to build one of those circuits into a pedal because I thought they sounded kind of neat. So yeah, so that would be that circuit. If it's the other Moto Teddys, they're Marshall preamps or the Jose preamp. All right, going on. John Marshall. He must have really dropped the voltage on that Letterman show. The pilot light didn't even seem to be on. Well, by the time the Letterman show was on, it's too far gone, right? That's like 1985, 84, 86. I don't know. He had short hair. I remember watching that live when I was in high school. By the time that amplifier was there, who knows what had been done to it, right? It had been through all those albums, right? So it could have been run on a Variac. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It didn't sound like Van Halen 1 to me. It sounded closer to like the sound he was using on 5150 and on the 1984 tour. Right, that's what that amp sounded like to me. So, yeah, I mean, he could have been on the Variac. Not sure. He could have been running through anything, too. That's another thing, right? I mean, I wouldn't put it past, right? I mean, I've worked for bands. I've been to shows, right? I think I've talked something about that, where you got an absolute wall of Marshall stacks, and the cabinets are empty. Right? I've been to shows where you've got Marshall stacks, and inside one of the 412s is a little combo amp that's being mic'd through the empty speaker hole in the grill. Right? I've talked to guys who are on the Rat tour, right, back in the 80s for Warren, And he even was using that little combo on the road, apparently. They didn't just use it in the studio, the little Super Champ for recording the solos and things like that. That actually they had the little amp too back behind the wall of amps. And I mean, these are all, take it with a grain of salt, that was, but the guy was there. He was one of the techs back then. So, you wouldn't put it past, considering how small that studio was, right? Back in the Letterman's day before he moved into the Ed Sullivan Theater. I think it's the Ed Sullivan Theater. I got it mixed up that I've been into. The Ed Sullivan Theater, you could probably blast in, right? But that other theater, that other studio where they did the original show back in that time, you couldn't do that. I don't see how you'd be able to manage making the sound good. I don't think it'd be possible if that amp was loud. You might want to better off kind of, plug into something else, right? Now, a lot of bands will have something like they call a fly rig, all right, or a TV rig. And I've built a few of those for bands when they travel. All right, here's the thing, right? So like if a band is on a tour, they're going to be carrying all of their gear in trucks, right? And these trucks, everything is like run like military, right? So every single truck has a diagram of exactly how it's loaded, right? And then there's logistics of how all these trucks are to be moved in one after the other into the loading bays behind the stage or into the stadiums themselves. And they're to be unloaded in a very particular order, in a very particular way by the crew or by the unions, right? So you will have like lighting guys come in, or the stage and carpenter guys come in. They put up the stage. Have lighting guys come in. They bring up, all of the gear and fly it all up. The sound guys will start flying stuff. The backline stuff usually comes in pretty much dead last, right? So when you're dead last, you've got to, you're going to be first out. Right? That's the next thing, is that when you break down, you're the first to go. So when those lights go off and there's not going to be another encore, guys are moving stuff right then. It's not like 5 minutes. It's like the guys are still wiping sweat off their neck coming off stage, and they're already pulling stuff apart and rolling cases, right? And it goes right onto the trucks. And the trucks are diagrammed, and this goes here, and this goes here, 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 here. So if you're going to go play Letterman, there's very little chance in my mind that you're going to have the same gear, right? That you're going to have on the tour. Now that's not to say it won't happen after a couple of nights in the same, in the same city that you couldn't undo that, but you'll have what's called a fly rig, and it'll be a smaller version of what you've got, right? That you can use for doing a TV hit, or if you got to go really quickly and do like a quick, appearance at a festival where it's not like you're headlining, right? It's like a TV appearance or a small, one-off cameo at a festival. And it's not always going to be the same gear. And I heard around that time, right? Because I was friends with some guys that did sound reinforcement down in Manhattan, right? Especially Harry Colby, who used to work on amps downtown. And right around the time of the Letterman show, I was hanging around Colby's shop every once and again. And he had told me that Ed had an ADA preamp. He said he saw it, that he was using the ADA stuff, and they were talking about it, right? So it may be crazy. Maybe he brought the head and an ADA preamp, put the head on stage, and, was plugged into the ADA. That kind of stuff happens all the time. It just does. All right. So I don't know. There's so much deception out there. It's tough to know. It really is. But yeah, that's a good question. It brought a lot of things into there. All right. Now we got from BMF 5150. Cool. I prefer no pedal. Me too. I actually preferred zero pedal. I don't think it's necessary. Now, Jamie Gusky replied to BMF 5150. Yeah, quite honestly, Stan. I guess that's BMF's real name is Stan. Stan Mooch. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Duh. You've been around and had plenty of great sounds with your gear. Yes. And even exchanged all types of value of information with Mark A. and the heavy hitters on the Metro forum. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, I have pages of screenshots and a ton of great suggestions, schematics, talks from, I got to expand this out, talks from that forum. I would think you would have plenty to say. Yeah, absolutely. So Mark A is, I'm guessing, Mark Abraham, who did a particular mod of a Marshall, which was called the Mod 5. And what the Mod 5 was, right, because I've been keyed into this, was a cascaded gain stage in pretty much a stock 70s circuit where you would have the normal input stage, but then the darker channel would be converted into something along the lines of a cold clipping circuit, right? Not to go as far as Soldano did, but close, more along the lines of what you found in the dual input master volume JCM 800 from, the late 70s and 80s, the over-under, right? That had a master and a preamp on it. What he used was a 10K cathode resistor, right? Which biases that second tube stage very cold. Now, Soldano used like a 39K, which is really cold. And what that does is it almost turns the tube into a diode where it has a very low ceiling, right? So with a diode clips because it sets a ceiling that no signal greater than this shall pass. So what happens is when the big sine wave, and I've got a video about this in the Jose's about explaining it better, but what happens is when that round big sine wave is hit with a Zener or a diode that's below the roof of that sine wave, it flattens it. It just squishes it down like you were to blow up a balloon inside of a box. It just gets flat. And that flat top to that waveform is what we perceive as distortion, right? So distortion is different than gain, right? That's something that's important to understand, right? You could put a ton of tube stages together to create clipping, right, which is distortion, and more gain. Or you could use one diode set and do the same thing, right, which creates the same amount of clipping and distortion, right? So the purpose of the higher cathode resistor was to create clipping and distortion, right? So yeah, that was the Mark A sort of like thing right there. And Jamie goes on, it's hard to believe how long Mark A has been gone. He was such a great talent. Yeah, I had heard that he had passed at a concert, right? But I don't know who he was playing for, whether he was playing with Hart. When I saw Hart, I think he was alive, but he wasn't playing for them at that point. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that. But yeah, it's always a shame when people that are really kind of, contributing go away. And the Metro Forum is George's site, right? George has of Metropolis amplification, right? George is a friend. We've hung out at amp shows, which will never be discussed. Been out to dinner during them, all that stuff. A lot of fun. He's a funny guy, I gotta say. If you're at an amp show and you're feeling down, find out if George is around and go hang out with him. You will forget your troubles. I guarantee it. He's a funny guy. So he had a forum, or has a forum, where there's a bunch of guys that talk about Marshalls and things like that, which is cool, right? So I tend to stay off the forums. Like I said, I don't like getting involved especially in other people's enterprises, right? So George did not put up his forum to have me walk around in it, right? So yeah, I'm not going to be, I don't like to post. I don't like that kind of stuff. Even doing this is like, I can't believe I'm actually in front of a camera talking, right? Because I spent all those years with Blockhead and Three Monkeys. I mean, I never did anything. I don't think I had a single post on the internet for like 20 years, except for one. I think I was talking to Randall Aiken once, where someone said that someone called me up and said, there's a guy I don't know, it's probably the gear page, said you were using cheap pots in your Blockheads. I thought you might want to respond to it, right? So I was like, cheap pots? It's like I'm using Claristats. The things cost me $12 a pop. What do you mean cheap? It was like they were cheap feeling. Because they don't have all that hydraulic goo that makes the knob turns slow. They're just quick, but they're mil-spec RV4, just, solid potentiometer. So I went on there. I was like, what do they talk about cheap pots? So I responded. I said, these pots, it's like one of my pots costs more than all the pots that are in a stock, new production Marshall amp. And Randall said, why don't you check out, it's the Canadian pot company. Now I'm drawing a blank. The hell's wrong with me? But anyway, he said, check out this other RV4 sealed potentiometer. And I was like, Randall's a cool dude. I like Randall a lot, right? He's got a great website where he shares information. Good place to start learning about amps if you want to, get an overview of things. So yeah, that's funny. Dan the Tube Man. Hey, Dan. What if the white knob was just a line out level? Yeah, could have been. I mean, we talked about that in that video. My problem with it is that it's far away, right? And it's far away from a jack that you would use to line out. So it'd be kind of like, I'm going to put the knob here and then the jack here for the line out, right? Because we only have 2 jacks on the back of that Marshall, which we're going to expand on in a minute. So one of those 2 would have to be the line out. So that would mean you would go from here to here, back to here, which doesn't make sense to me. Right? I mean, not to say that it couldn't have been done. Maybe there was a hole already there that was used for, I don't know, hiding weed. and Jose was like, I'll just put it in the weed hole. And so yeah, it's possible, but you never know. So what if the knob was a line out level to slave power amps? I think slaving was definitely part of it. Eddie might have used that to put a delay after the distortion and match the levels, not to overdrive and add much distortion to the delay. Now, this is a man, I am guessing, who is speaking from experience, right? That this is a guy that has probably sussed out how you're going to run amplifiers, right? That Dan is probably experienced with like a master slave setup or a wet dry rig or something like that, right? So yeah, you want to put things like delays and time-based effects, right? By time-based, I mean they use delays or cascading delays to create effects like phasing and flanging, right? So yeah, if you want your flange to really sound good or your phaser to sound good, it would go after. Maybe in front too sounds pretty cool, but I would put things like the Echoplex after all this stuff, right? So it would be head loaded down into like the echoes. That way, yes, the repeats are not going to be so strong, right? Because if you got it in front, every repeat is then amplified. And if you've got a distortion level, it's almost, the repeats are going to be almost, if not identically loud to the primary due to the clipping factors. Right? So that's why I say with a heavy distortion sound, you really don't want to have delays in front of the thing. I mean, to get it low enough would be tough. It wouldn't sound right. So yes, Dan, 100%, I agree with you. And here we got Sligari. Yes, so this is Scott. What's up, Scott? All right. It said, I believe that Eddie's overriding concern in the early days was volume control. Yes. A way to get a great sound and feel at reduced volume. Yes, he has stated that many times. That's my best approach in deciphering the Van Halen one tone. Although it's important to look at this problem from all angles. Yes. Perhaps he brought the volume down and then used the GE10 to push the front end of his Marshall to restore the drive. Very possible. Necessity is the mother of invention. End of story. Thomas Edison, right? Maybe not. He stole everything. He might have probably stole that shit too. So, that's how I approach things too. It's like, what was he trying to do? Right? Because it wasn't just like, I'm going to connect this to this and see what he was trying to solve a problem. Right? And the end tone was first, it really was created by a need, right? And then shaped as best it could to sound good. And the problem was playing in clubs. And it still is the problem. It's always going to be the problem. If you're playing in, even now, even in arenas, right? The front of house guys, the other band guys, you got to hear how they go at it in Aerosmith. It's nuts, right? It's like Joe's too loud. Brad's too loud. Steven can't hear himself. Everybody's on in-ears. So, everybody's moving now towards where the stage volume is so low that you could, if there was no front of house reinforcing, no overhead flying speakers and none of that stuff, you could have a conversation on stage, right? Except for the drummer, right? And they usually got him caged off in plexiglass, so you can't hear him either. But yeah, volume is the problem. Volume is the problem. So how would you want it? How could you get a cranked Marshall sound and at a low volume? Slaving. That's the way. That is the best way. It is, and then you can dial it in, right? So now with this amp, when you plug it into a speaker cabinet, it's comfortable, right? It's not screaming loud. But that's not to say it's at the right volume either, right? Because let's say you're playing on stage, and this is before you have in-ears, right? Because in the 70s, no one was using in-ears. And by that, I mean these are little hearing aids that stick in there that are radio, right? Radio frequency, they're radio transmitted, right? So the front of house sound comes back into your ears, and you can hear the mix of the entire band, right? And you could hear yourself. Now, back in the day, they didn't have that stuff, right? So you still had to hear yourself on stage. So if your drummer is really loud, you would want your amp to be at the right level for the room and for you to hear yourself. So you would want it variable. So even with this, you would still want to use a power amp. So you go this, effects, power amp, speakers. Now you could dial in the appropriate stage volume so you can hear yourself, but it's not too loud so that the front of house guy says to get the fuck out of here, right? So they're going to do that. They don't want that. It's too difficult to deal with. Mic bleed into everybody else's shit. I mean, you're trying to mix it and you're trying to EQ the voice, the vocal, and you got the guitars blasting through there more than you can hear the voice. It's a nightmare. You can't do it, right? So you have to control stage volume. And that's what Eddie was doing. So I agree 100%. And yeah, anything he did, placing things around, right? Maybe he loaded it down and found, oh man, this thing doesn't sound right no more. I need to put a little bit more mids up. So it's like, what can I do? I'll get an EQ and I'll shove that in there, right? And I'll boost the mids up before it goes into the next power amp. Very possible. So good point, Scott. And we have Hex Rockstar. I agree. Variac way down causes loss of gain, needs to be boosted. It doesn't necessarily. Now, once again, we're talking about gain versus clipping, right? With this thing is Variac in a sense. It has a power transformer that simulates a Variac set in the 80s, right? 80 volts in the 80 range. And it has plenty, right? I mean, I'll just give you a quick, because not everybody's always heard, what the amp does or whatever. So I'll just give a quick, I'm going to turn on the mic for this and just play through the amp for a quick second. Got to pick. So yeah, so this is like if you had run the amp at about, let's say 84 volts, somewhere around there, right? It's more distorted than a stock amp, right? That's also due to the biasing and the way that it's loading. But yeah, it's in that first album sound, there's clipping and then there's volume. Okay. So that's what we're dealing with. And there are no right answers. So please don't think that I'm telling you how it is. I'm just giving you what I think. And as I change my mind, which I do, I'll let you know, right? I'm definitely not afraid of course correction. I've always been a fan of that, right? Because that's called learning, right? The more you learn, you correct your course. So to me, that first album is clipping more so than gain, right? It's squishing the signal down. And then that signal is made loud, which creates the never-ending sustain and feedbacks, right? And now it doesn't have to be puking loud. It just has to be loud enough where you have the relationship between the guitar and the speaker cabinet becomes a feedback loop, right? So they start to reinforce each other. Now that doesn't require a tremendous amount of gain. That has to do more so with sound pressure, right? The ability to vibrate, right? That the sound coming out of the cabinet, the air pressure waves, are enough to sympathetically vibrate the strings, the body, the windings inside the pickup, all of these things. And that's where you get that magical loop happening of reinforcing stuff. Now, that's my theory. When you have this clipping sound, which is, right? And then it's loud as pee-pee, right? But in here, I'm missing that part with the aux, right? Because I can't be loud in here. This is, the aux is direct, right? So my guitar is receiving no feedback. I had done something with a Fernandez sustainer in another video. Maybe I'll dig that out again, where I fed the aux output back into the Fernandez, right? Which simulated kind of that deal, right? It simulated, but it wasn't perfect, but it worked. So now when you held a note, it would go into, right then it would be going into wah kind of feedback, right? So, That's I think the theory of operation for right now. Okay, so thanks for the comment, Hex Rockstar. But you are correct. I would say, into my ears, if I take that 70 Marshall, that's stock, the 70 or 71s, any of those Marshalls, and I knock it down a few volts, it loses gain. Absolutely. Right? It's not as distorted, right? It doesn't drive as hard. But if you change some other things, you're good to go. All right, so, okay, so that is the end of the comments question, right? So here's the next thing that I wanted to just quickly bring up as a topic, and then we're getting close to being way too long, but it's kind of fun. More pink drink. So my biz partner, Greg, right? He's out with Aerosmith right now. He's also worked for, a bunch of other bands. And he's my business partner in Three Monkeys. For my birthday this year, which was months ago, he got me this, right? Which is cool. So he got it from Steve. He didn't sign it, which is okay. But we went out for barbecue here, and he handed me the book, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. So as fate would have it, I opened up the book and pointed to a line, and it was exactly what I was looking for. And now I can't find it, but I'm going to go through it. And I'm sure if any of you guys have this book, you'll know. I was trying to look for it just before we came on, but it's taken too long. Next episode, I'll show it to you in the book. But it says, in this book, which is a collection of all the interviews, right, of Ed with Steve Rosen, he talks about using 2 amps, that he always used 2 amps. And this is, this is not from an interview from 2015 or 2000. We're talking, that he always used 2 amps. So that's what I pointed to right away. And I'm thinking to myself, that's, to me, you're not going to use 2 amps if you're trying to contain your volume. If you have volume problems playing in clubs, the solution isn't 2 amps in series, or rather in parallel, right? You're not like 1 amp is way too loud, but if I plug into 2 amps, it suddenly is quieter. No, the only way that makes sense is if he's running one head into the next and using the second head to set the overall volume. That's the only way that makes sense. So I'm firmly in the camp that he was slaving. I'm firmly in that camp. Maybe one day I'll change my mind, but I just believe that was the case. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was in that regard, we've got the Zlaz pick with the white knob, right? So we're looking at the back of the amplifier. Okay, now in the picture, we have two speaker leads coming out. One's got tape on it, one's a different kind of cable, right? So I drew up something. Now, there was another interview of Steve Lukather on, I think it was on the Sunset. It may have been on in another forum by another interviewer, but he had stated that he had worked with Don Landy, right, more than once, right? Because, I mean, Luke was living at Sunset Sound. Don Landy and Ted were always there too, right? Their paths crossed. They worked together. He said that Ted always took a line out from the back of his amp and brought it into the console. And he said that he did that with Ed too. And he kind of had that, like, kind of grin, like, I just said something that, maybe you never heard before. And I think that's the case, right? Like years ago, I did a video where I combined things, right? So anyway, let me just show you. So there was sort of like his amplifier, right? This would have been the back of Ed's amplifier on the floor. There's the notorious white knob. So you had one speaker lead and another speaker lead coming out of the two speaker jacks, right? Now, I am supposing or theorizing that one is going to Landy in the control room, Professor Plum in the library with the lead pipe. And the other one is going into the rest of the rig, right? Which would be, Echoplex, all that good stuff, maybe, whatever, power, the next Marshall, power amps and speaker cabinets, and mic'd up, right? So that's possible. So to do something, just to show you what that would be like, because I don't know whether everybody has done this and understands sort of what creates guitar sounds, right, that we're used to hearing, and what an amplifier is capable of and what it's not, right? So right now I've got this set up. I had it muted, but I'm going to show you. I have the Marshmallow right here is set up this way. The line out, right, from the back of the amp is going into a splitter right now. It splits it into two, right? So it's one, which is then split into two. There's no active circuit in there. It just connects two jacks to one, right? So you get one, you can divide it out into two ways. One of these signals is going into the aux, which is then going into the interface into the Macintosh. The next one is bypassing the aux and going directly into the interface, right? Bypassing the aux, which for all intents and purposes, we could call the speaker cabinet. The aux, for our purposes, is the speaker cabinet. So we have something similar to that theoretical setup of one speaker rig, one direct rig going into the control, and then the two are mixed. So let me grab this again. Now, a Marshall amp has a full bandwidth, right? Is capable of reproducing the entire spectrum of frequencies, right, that it's presented with. It's an amplifier. It's not just a guitar amplifier. It sounds like a guitar amplifier when you use something like Celestions, which have a frequency curve and cutoffs and create what we know as a guitar sound. But if you're to listen to the sound without speakers, right, which I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to turn off the aux, and I'm going to just show you what this guitar sounds like direct. And I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So you can see the frequency range is greatly extended, especially in the higher frequencies, right? So a Celestion speaker has a distinct roll-off past 3K, 3 kilohertz, right? Whereas the amplifier itself is capable of going into, well, beyond what we can hear, right? Because you've heard of things like parasitic oscillations, right? These are oscillations that are at such a high frequency that they go beyond what the human ear can deal with. And you can only see them on the scope, right? But they're there and they're being dealt with and amplified. So in this case, that is full frequency. We're going out well beyond, right? So if that is to be combined with the normal sound, you're going to get an extended frequency range. But just for giggles, let's put some reverb from the sunset on this sound that we've got, and my voice is going to get it too. So apologies for that. Okay, so this is let me get into the chambers. Chamber 3. Okay, so this is sunset sound. Going to turn down. That looks good. Turn down the reverb a tiny bit. So now we're in sunset sounds, and let's listen to that. Oop, looks like it's time for a truss rod adjustment. It's fretting out. Okay, so we can hear that, right? I mean, that component is somewhat in. Let me turn off the reverb here. Okay, that component is somewhere in the sound, right? Now, the next thing you're going to notice, right, is we're going to combine this now with the speaker sound. Now, you're going to get phase issues, right? When you present two sounds that are from two different places, you get phasing issues, whether they be two microphones that are placed in different places, sound reaches at different points, and then when they're combined or summed together, they create notches and weird effects, right? Something like a comb filtering or a phasey kind of sound, right? So let's combine it, and it's going to sound weird. So I haven't dialed any of this in yet. This is just, experimental just to show you. But if you were to use, some studio gear, like to flip the phase, to change the phase, to delay it a little bit, a few milliseconds to line the waveforms back up again, it'll start to sound coherent. But let me turn on... Okay, so this is our speaker sound now. Now I'm going to add back in that DI kind of sound. Now you can hear right now the phase issue, right? It sounds kind of hollowed out, almost frozen flange. Very hollow, like... Oh. Right? But if we were to, let's say, turn it down a little bit, so it's just noticeable. Bring it up a little bit more. Let's try it there. So you're getting the speaker sound. And I've just added this amount in. Right? Add the reverb in. And then the dry. Now, I'm hearing a lot. I'm just going to try this for fun. I'm hearing a lot of the a lot of that kind of in the sort of lower frequency range. So if I were to take this DI signal, right, I'm going to bring it to a track. I'm going to go into the channel EQ, and I'm going to do a really drastic high pass filter so I could just get the top end. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to turn on a high pass, and I'm just going to basically high pass it all the way up, right, past 2K. We'll go out to like 3,300 hertz, somewhere around there. So hopefully everything beyond that, below that, is going to go away somewhat. But it's not a hard wall. It's more of a slope. So let me just hear it with it and without it. Turn the EQ on. Right? Let's maybe even bring that up a little bit more. If we could change this to like a sharper Q, I now got the bend point. It's 24 dB per octave, which is a pretty good, amount of cut, but it's definitely not a sharp Q. So right now I'm at 52 hertz, 5.2 K, right? Let's listen to it again. So that definitely sounds, like that's where that extra hair is coming from. A lot of it, right? Let's see if we even bring up a little bit more of this top. Let's see what that sounds like. That's maybe a bit too much. Turn that down a little bit. So there's something there, right? Which is something that should be played around with if you want to get even closer. I think, I don't think that Luke was lying. Let's put it that way. It's sort of like glue, right? It contains all the frequencies. So let's say, I think we talked about this years ago, right? When I was doing the 2 1176s that you see over there. I've got 4 of them. And I was smashing them together, right, to create this kind of cool distorted sound. I mean, that was something that Landy did, right, using direct sounds with little feet in compressors to create these sounds that he could combine with, more natural sounds that would be emanating from speakers, right? And then you also have the reverb, right, the speaker in the reverb chamber. Right, that's going to impart its own character as well, and that's recorded. So that's mixed into there. So I think that there's something to be said for this DI, right? That combining the DI along with the speaker sound is part of the recipe. All right, so tell me what you think. Tell me where we're going. Give me some more comments. Let's have some more fun, and we'll go on. So until next time, I'll see you.